Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Nile, and I am honestly, I'm on fucking island time, baby.
Yeah.
I'm about to go on a vacation for like the first time in, I think, close to a decade, like a real vacation. So I just signed off my last day of work for the next like week and a half, and I'm sitting down to record this podcast, and it's like, there's just this like broad open expanse in front of me, and I'm very much looking forward to unplugging.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Beautiful. We do have to kind of reel you back in because you do have to do this like last bit of like hour and a half of work. I know you are technically on vacation, but we're kind of like, if you think about it, when we podcast together, we're kind of like each other's boss in a way.
We're really putting a hierarchical power structure in here.
Yeah,
in a way that
it's a hierarchy that I think it shifts depending on who has done the research that week or whatever. So I guess as your boss this week, I'm gonna need you to fucking lock in, get back into work mode real quick.
Yeah.
No, this is gonna be a fun story. This is another new top favorite stories in the world of weird for me. It's so good. And on top of that, the creamy goodness. That's right. The creamy goodness of a weird story about, I'll say it, a UFO.
Okay.
We do have an email.
Oh, okay. I thought you were... I understand what you were saying now. I took that as saying the creamy goodness was the fact that it was a UFO encounter, which, like, I like a UFO thing, but it's not, like, unusual for this podcast. But I'm with you now, and right. I'm ready for this fucking email.
The cherry on top of this creamy goodness is this email, which we got from Bradley, the dinosaur scientist.
Oh, shit. Hey, Bradley.
So, shouts out to Bradley. It's an interesting email because, let's just get into it because I don't think we're going to be able to answer all of Bradley's questions immediately. But let me just say this. I'm taking note of what Bradley asks here. Okay. So Bradley says, hey guys, Brad the dinosaur scientist here with a non-dinosaur related email. Years ago, when I first found the podcast, I spent several weeks working my way through the entire back catalog of episodes, or so I thought. Earlier this week, I realized that I had never actually listened to the first 6 episodes as a family emergency had come up during my binge and they got lost in the shuffle of things. I felt like I needed to fix that as soon as possible, and now that I'm finished, I have some things to say.
Oh, no.
Oh, God. Yeah, so... These are a series of questions that I guess pertain to the first 6 episodes, which the only one that sticks out in my mind at all is episode 1, because we've kind of had to revisit that for various reasons throughout the podcast's history. So apparently, these questions, there's a series of questions here. I'm like I said, I'm going to get ahead of it now. We can't answer all these, but maybe it's something worth pondering. Okay. So here's what Bradley wants to know based off the first 6 episodes. Well, this isn't a question. This is a statement. The podcast is definitely still peak cute.
That was, I think, from episode 1. Was it? Okay. Garrett, we got really into saying it with very over the top pronunciation of like peak cute.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
that kind of thing. It was a joke. Haha.
Okay. Number 2, can Nile occasionally blame everything on Yetis again? Likewise, can we get a possible return to shitting on lore? We kind
a podcast
of did
that I think we still have not ever listened to.
We've never listened to lore. I've listened to like one episode, I think, a couple years ago.
We should put the fucking... What, didn't lore get like an Amazon Prime series or something?
Yeah,
we should put that on the It Gets Weird TV.
Yo, It Gets Weird TV.
Look, if you want us to shit on lore, if you're a fan of those early episodes, we're going to put it on subscribe to the Patreon. We're going to be doing a new It Gets Weird TV series here shortly, and you can vote in the poll and make us watch the lore TV series. And yeah,
patreon.com/itgetsweird. Check it out. That's a great idea. Third question that I can definitively answer: did Kyle ever learn to burp? Now, if you'd like, I could take a swig of this water next to me and prove to you that I can, in fact, burp. But let me put it this way. Over the last however many years, Nile has had to edit out many, many burps from me. I did figure it out. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but I had like a very severe vomit phobia for a long time. I still obviously don't like it or want to vomit, but like I would suppress any sensation of something coming back up and out of my mouth for like my entire life. And that's why I didn't burp. But I didn't realize that's why I didn't burp until years later.
Yeah, you had to psychologically unpack that one like in your 20s.
Yeah. So yes, I can burp now. Honestly,
yeah, I had to edit one out of the last episode we recorded. We'll find out if I have to edit one out of this one.
Next question. Should Kanye still be inducted into the Illuminati? And I'm going to go ahead and say yes, he's anti-Semitic enough now to, kind of be a part of that whole thing. So I will probably
say he's kind of fucking up the whole private, like the secretive part of it.
That's true.
He's a little too you can't really call him a whistleblower. But he wouldn't be good at keeping the secrets of the Illuminati. So I'm going to say he now has gone too far. And while the beliefs are in line, the ability to keep his mouth shut is not. So
yeah. Okay. I'm going to kind of go through the last couple ones here a little quickly. Did you ever get your "What would Aleister Crowley do" bumper stickers? No, we did not.
No.
Presumably something that exists out there, though. Honestly.
Yeah.
Then, not a question, a statement. It was hilarious to hear the very first dog death on the podcast, followed by the phrase, "Hopefully nobody kills any more puppies." That's oh boy. Yeah, that is funny, given the context of the last 8 years. And then, do you remember that you covered the Hellier documentary before it was ever released during your Hopkinsville Goblins episode? And I don't know how to answer that because I don't know. We might have to go back and listen.
Yeah, I don't know. Did we somehow find like an unreleased documentary to watch? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't remember that. But
I don't know. We'll get back to you on that one. And then the final question. The final question was, how's the piss take episode coming? Again, I think I have to go back and listen to figure out what that is. I can only guess what the piss take is. Is that like when we take a bunch of piss breaks in the middle of the show and keep it on the recording? Or is that, I know we did that episode where we like talked about the Trump piss tape. But that's like later than episode 6. So Bradley, I'll have to get back to you.
The only episode my brother is on.
I know. It's very funny in retrospect. So Bradley finishes up the email with, it was wild hearing how far you've come. The first big question, the first dead dog, the first Garrett guest spot, the first tell your congressman. Keep up the great work. Looking forward to new episodes until Nibiru wipes us all out. Signed, Brad. Thank you, Brad, as always. Appreciate the email. I'm going to have to revisit those at some point and force myself to cringe through it to catch all the references here. And I'll let you know what about the piss take and the Hellier documentary. So
yeah.
Whew. All right, Nile.
Yeah.
Having done all that, this week, I decided to take a little bit of a break from the CIA intrigue. I get a little bit of a time away from it. We're going to come back, don't you worry. And I wanted to do what I kind of feel is the podcasting equivalent of wrapping us up in a warm blanket by the fire, get a warm cup of our preferred hot beverage. That being, I told you, the delicious cream. This is a discussion about a classic 1960s UFO and alien experience. This is the story of the Cisco Grove encounter.
Cisco, okay. So, Grove, the ones that I know of that are groves are like European, UK, specifically like England encounters. Are we in England?
Absolutely not.
Damn it.
So, for anybody who's interested in what I'm about to talk about, this story is sourced from a book called Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter, and it's written by Noah Torres and Ruben Uriarty. I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry. But it was written with help from the Shrum family, who is going to be our focus here. So, our main character is a 28-year-old guy named Donald Shrum. At the time, he's 28. He would be... I was just telling you how I couldn't figure out if he was dead or not, but I believe he'd be like 88 years old. Okay. So he might still be alive. I did not find an obituary for this guy. I looked him up, and none of the sources bring it up either. So he might still be alive. So yeah, Donald Shrum, a resident of Sacramento, California.
Okay,
which,
so we're in California.
Yeah, I actually have family out there. So, I could, if I were to visit them, go and check out this spot.
And also maybe hunt down Dave Shrum.
And maybe hunt down Donald Shrum. Yeah, could be. Lives in Sacramento with his wife Judy and his 1-year-old infant daughter Donna at the time. September 4th, 1964. And Donald is going to go hunting on a hunting trip to Cisco Grove in, how do you pronounce, is it Tahoe National Forest?
Yeah.
Tahoe. So he's going to go to Tahoe National Forest, Cisco Grove, with two of his buddies who are named Vincent Alvarez and Tim Trueblood. Trueblood is an absurd name.
Yeah.
So I guess for this season, guns were not permitted, but they could use a bow and arrow. And Donald kind of talks about how he actually felt more comfortable with the bow and arrow. So
this is it was, you probably don't have this information, but were they we're all skilled hunters, so we're going to give ourselves a challenge? Or was this some sort of rustic getaway? Why bow and arrows?
I don't even think it's either. I think it's just that. So Donald talks about how he's actually just comfortable with the bow and arrow. And I think it's just there are certain times where you can hunt, but you can't use guns to do it.
Oh, okay.
That's what it sounded like. I don't know if this is an old way of doing things, but it's they could go out with bow and arrows. They could not fire guns. They could still hunt. They just couldn't. It's sort of, I don't know. It's the low techness of it makes me think, I was trying to think myself what was going on here. And it made me wonder if maybe before the winter, you can hunt with a low tech setup that isn't liable to accidentally shoot a random person, And then when the winter comes, there's less people out in the forest. You can then bust out rifles or whatever you use. It is sort of, I have no idea if that's true, but that's what was in my mind is why is this the setup? I don't know.
Or would if they allow guns, they were afraid people would overhunt. So
yeah, maybe
it's less efficient. Maybe
it was a seasonal thing, is what the book was saying. So
okay.
I'm guessing that at some point firearms were permitted, but I don't know. I really can't say. But nonetheless, they were all equipped with bow and arrow. And so they go together and set up a camp, and then they sort of split up to begin their hunt. So Donald talks about how as the day dragged on into evening, he began to feel a bit lost. Quote, I got down in this really brushy country. I really got tangled up, and by the time I got out of there, it was dark. I could see the moon was starting up, and I could see a big granite cliff with a crack that went up the side. And the crack was about a foot wide. So I was able to walk up there, and there was a tree right at the edge when I got up there. I figured there's a lot of bears in the area, so I figured I would spend the night in the tree. And so night is rapidly approaching, and he does exactly that. He ends up getting up in this tree. In the book that I read, there's actually photos of all the stuff that he describes, like the rock cliff face of granite and this tree. Like, there's multiple photos of the tree that he stayed in. So he ends up...
What if he, while he was sleeping, his arm fell out of his sleeping bag or whatever and into that 1 foot wide crevasse, and it gave him like 127 hours situation?
Oh God. I mean,
like,
that would be rough. It's weird because I don't think he even has a sleeping bag on him. I think he has like camo get up and like maybe a pack of some things, but like, no joke, we're going to get like a pretty detailed account of what he had with him when this all went down. I think the way they describe it is like, one thing that's really crazy is like, apparently Donald had scoliosis. And what he's doing here is he's like finding two branches relatively close to one another that he can just like lay himself between is how it's described.
Really?
So, and I'm just like, that's fucking crazy. But apparently he was thinking, I don't want to get caught by a predator, and I'm lost, so I'm going to just get up here and do this.
Yeah, I know like rock climbers have a way to like mount their sleeping bags to the side of a cliff.
I don't think he was doing that
kind
at
of
all.
situation.
No.
But no, he's just hanging out in a tree.
I think he's literally just lost and making the best of what he's got.
All right.
And I think all the sleeping stuff is back at the camp. So he ends up getting up there, and he's up in the tree around sundown, approximately 7 p.m. And then by 9 p.m., it was, as he described it, basically pitch black outside. And now that it's very dark outside, that's when he sees something strange. So to the north, below the top of a ridge, Donald sees an odd light in the darkness. He watches this orb of light as it bobs up and down, and it travels from east to west. And on first thought, Donald thinks, well, maybe that's a lantern or a flashlight that I'm seeing. Because he has another two friends who are out there who are maybe looking for him. And then the next thought he has, after kind of watching it for a moment, is he thinks maybe it's a helicopter, which I found very interesting for reasons. So
this was 1960s, right?
1964, yep.
Okay. I mean, I guess helicopters, like, I know helicopters existed, but that's they're not nearly as prevalent as they are nowadays.
Maybe not, but helicopters had been around, and helicopters had been around. So he had been separated from his hunting crew and kind of assumed maybe they'd called some sort of search and rescue team, some nearby installment that would send out the helicopter to find him. So he's still assuming that this orb of light is a helicopter, and as he does so, he climbs down from the tree that he's in, and he makes two small signal fires with nearby brush. And another important thing is he has matchbooks on hand, like multiple. Apparently he keeps them on him. I don't quite understand why, because I guess it is like a fire starting thing for being out in nature is sort of the impression that I got.
Yeah.
So he's standing in between these two very small fires that he's made, and he's like waving his arms, trying to flag down what he thinks is a helicopter. And then this orb of light, it seems to suddenly stop, turn around, and begin flying towards him. And as it began to approach him, that's when he realized that this craft was ominously silent. And realizing that it was not making noise is when he started to get anxious that maybe this was not a helicopter. So one thing that's sort of interesting here is that Donald's description of the UFO changes slightly depending on when the story is being told, because he has told it a number of times and under different contexts. And that's not me saying like, oh, I'm discrediting him because his story changed. I'm just saying that I think that the situation he's in, it's hard for him to get to nail things down details wise.
Like how does it change?
Well, so he talks about how dark it was and how the way he was able to guess at its shape is based on how many stars in the sky seem to be obscured by its presence. Like, it's that dark.
Okay. Yeah.
But like this description, it wouldn't so much change as it would change. Like, okay, the big change that I think happened is when he would later undergo regressive hypnosis, which we'll get to that. But he will describe it as like way bigger. When he describes it as bigger, but like he also has a description here that like once he realizes this thing's not a helicopter and a couple things start to happen, he realizes the object is way bigger than he realizes. He thinks it's somewhat small, and things start to happen, and he's like, "Oh shit, this thing's actually pretty big." So, and yeah, again, completely silent. So, yeah, to his credit, it's super dark. He's like, it's like the darkness punched out of the sky is how he's guessing at size here. And at this moment, he describes that the shape that's sort of punched out, it's I think his initial description was like more oval, but as he sort of like thinks about it and talks about it more, it sort of morphs into being described as a cigar-shaped craft.
Okay.
So when it begins to approach him, and then it starts to turn. And when it turns, he realizes that the orb of light that he'd been watching almost seemed to be just like a single point of light at the hole, like at the front of this craft. And he says it had an aura almost like a fluorescent bulb.
Interesting. Okay. So basically he had, it sounds like when he thought it was a helicopter, he kind of saw it one way. And then
from
once
the front.
he realized that was like, it wasn't what he thought it was, he got a new perspective on the thing. And it was much bigger and different and whatever than he thought it was originally. Okay. That all tracks.
Yeah. But because he's realizing like maybe this isn't a helicopter, it's silent, fear begins to set in. And so Donald grabs his hunting bow and he climbs back up into the nearby tree that he described earlier, the one that he was perched in. And he's like something like 12 feet off the ground. And he watches as this craft, whatever it is, floats within 50 to 60 yards in front of him, hovering over the nearby canyon that he's sort of overlooking here. And then it performs this half-circle maneuver around the tree that he's perched in. And as it does so, moonlight shines onto the craft, which is interesting to me. So moonlight starts to actually shine on this thing, and that's when Donald notices that there are 3 rectangular panels or maybe windows of some kind that are along the side of the object. So he sees it from the front, the orb of light. It turns to the side. There's 3 panels. It not only made no sound, but he describes it as like the body of this thing was absorbing the light around it almost.
Okay.
And upon noticing the 3 panels, he also had the alarming realization that, like I said, the craft is way bigger than he had initially thought. And he describes these 3 panels or windows or whatever they are as having a weird shimmering quality to them, which he describes as, quote, like you would take aluminum foil and shake it, wiggle it against the fire, and you would see the glistening, shimmering effect.
Interesting. I would be interested to look, because we've had a couple UFO cases where the craft had, I think it's been 3 a couple times, but have had these kind of windows or panels or whatever people call them. I'm curious if like if we go back and look at the ones that have had that, are they in the same time period? Or was that like a feature that got added in like the 60s or whatever? Or is that because like I know that it can go back to like Utsurobune has fucking panels on the side.
Oh
of it,
yeah,
and that's like ancient Japan.
Yeah.
But then like I think that a lot of it, they got very smooth for a while in like the 1940s, and then I don't know when the panels started acting up again.
That's a good question. I mean, my immediate assumption is that because like at a certain point with UFOs and the people who are experiencing them, you can kind of almost feel the currently popular science fiction start to bleed into it, you know?
I was thinking of The Day the Earth Stood Still for sure.
Yeah. So and like even in I think the book that I was reading, they had a section where they bring up pop culture, including The Day the Earth Stood Still. So I sort of wonder if that has anything to do with it, but I honestly don't know. It'd be interesting. Somebody has to have done this, and if a listener knows, you know, please hit us up. But somebody has to have like examined like the timeline of these sort of typical shapes and styles and details of UFOs over the decades. Like, what was your typical like late 1940s, early 1950s UFO? Did it change after like this point in the history or whatever? That has to exist. I would be very interested in seeing that. It's a good question.
Timeline of UFO trends.
Yeah.
I'd be into it.
Yeah. So the UFO hovers there, and Donald watches it for about 5 minutes or so. And he claims that at one point this craft, I think this happens maybe twice during this entire night, but the craft would like shoot into the sky at an extreme speed and then just suddenly return moments later. And then later Donald would say, quote, "I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It looked just like a star. It moved that fast just in that second." So it could not only move at inhuman speeds, and of course it would just produce no sound doing so. So he continues to watch the thing, and then all hell breaks loose. Donald describes it, quote, "I sat there and watched it. It must be 4 or 5 minutes or so, and then something came out of the second panel," which by second panel he means like the one in the middle. And all I could see was a kind of a flash. Something went straight down the hill. So the middle panel of this craft suddenly flashes bright, like a bright flash photography, and immediately following the flash, a smaller dark object fell out of the thing. What I think is interesting is like when you look at some of the illustrations of this moment, it's like, I mean, it's literally drawn at, you see where this is going. It's drawn as a mothership deploying a scout ship. And you see like a classic saucer UFO flying out of like a bay window thing. But the way he talks about it is he sees a dark object just fall out of it. And this is when he has the sort of realization that this was a mothership deploying a scout ship. But what he says is that he couldn't really tell what the object was that shot out of the craft. But he does say that whatever the object was, it, quote, shot straight down, like almost like it fell. So to me, that doesn't necessarily suggest like a manned vehicle, you know?
Yeah, it almost seems like they're dropping the waste out of the bathroom tank. You know?
Yeah, this could be the ufological Dave Matthews of California.
Yeah, they're dropping icicle piss out of their fucking receptacles.
Well,
you know?
I don't think it's waste. Because he does describe the thing that comes out when he gets another look at it. Moments later, Donald sees the so-called scout ship on the north side of the ridge in the darkness. And initially, like I said, it's just a dark object, sort of like the mothership object. He doesn't like see if it has any color. But what he does notice is that there's a little blinking light flashing on the top of the object, which he now can see is like domed, sort of like a classic UFO, like a saucer. And the moonlight, once it catches the moonlight, he says that it was like a silvery color. So he finally gets a little bit of detail on this thing. It's silvery.
The mothership or the main one?
The scout ship, the quote unquote scout ship. So like it's a domed thing with a blinking light on top that's silvery.
Okay.
And this thing had fallen out of the mothership approximately half a mile away from him. And he would go on to say, quote, when it landed up on the ridge, I could only see part of the top, but it had a little light on it, and it looked like the top of a flying saucer that I'd seen in pictures, like a dome. Now, the thing is, like, it's a little unclear. One of the things that I was trying to figure out is whether or not Donald posited the alien and extraterrestrial stuff himself, or whether he was helped along by like investigators who would come in later. I don't know for sure, but I think he comes to that conclusion himself for reasons that we will get to.
Okay, so even like you think that when he's like in his initial accounts before other people talked to him, he thought it was aliens?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So the scout ship then stopped moving, and moments later, Donald heard a, quote, crashing through the brush down the mountainside, which he says it was like a group of unknown people hurriedly making their way down the brush down a slope. So, like, imagine, like, a group of people doing that, like, half-run, half-walk thing down a slope. Yeah. You know what I mean?
They lose their balance just a little bit and have to kind of take a bunch of little steps.
They fucking go tumbling down. Yeah, exactly. Donald believes that the shimmering panels on the craft may have been 20 to 30 feet wide, which, you know, again, it's not totally clear to me when that detail comes out, because, like, his initial encounter with the thing, it doesn't feel that crazy big, and then later on, when the story starts becoming official and getting showing up places, he is talking about a much bigger craft, I think. So he hears this crashing sound, and during the entire encounter that's about to follow, both the mothership and this scout, I guess, were close by.
Okay.
And moments later, Donald sees what he describes as a humanoid walking out of the thick brush towards where he was hidden up in the tree. So these things start walking out of the brush into view. He describes the creature as being approximately 5 feet tall, and it seemed to be dressed in a, quote, tight-fitting, light-colored uniform, possibly a whitish silver color. The elbows and knees of the suit had bellows or creases, and Donald would describe them as, quote, awfully short, stocky, but human in form.
Okay, so we're dealing with a kind of biped, but it's so like almost like a mythological dwarf, like short and stocky and like, but humanoid.
Well,
or is it something weirder?
Here's the thing: he says short and stocky, but he also says that like they're maybe 5 feet tall or something.
Okay,
people can be 5 feet tall.
Yeah, that's just a short king.
Yeah. Thank you for saying so. So yes, these short kings, their heads were covered by some sort of hood or helmet. In illustrations of the creature done by a guy named Neil Reeb, that are featured in this book, the creature it just straight up, to be frank, looks like it's wearing a hazmat suit. Straight up.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
In fact, when we get the final details of this thing, it's wearing what looks like a hazmat suit, and over its face, it has what I would describe as a gas mask.
Interesting.
So
like pyro gas mask kind of
sort
thing?
of, maybe not quite that elaborate. We'll get to it, but
okay.
Donald says that the only feature he could really make out of their faces were these, quote, 2 large circular eyes that made it seem as if the creature was wearing welder's goggles. Which, again, I'm just going to say, I'm thinking gas mask here. I mean, I don't want to color anybody's perception of this, because maybe it is fucking aliens from Venus, but, like, everything he says about them makes them seem like they're humans in hazmat suits and goggles and stuff.
Yeah, the cleaners from Venus are having some fucking hazmat goggles so that they can clean up our planet.
He said the book here says that if there were any other features to the face, Donald couldn't see them, which is weird because he later talks about a nose. So this first one shows up, right? And then a second identical one in the same garb follows from behind the first one. And both the creatures halt about 100 feet away from where Donald was perched. And another really bizarre detail here is that these humanoids, throughout the entire encounter, they seem to be gathering up samples of various things in the area. But when he first encounters them, they're like messing around, and he sort of describes that maybe they were getting samples of a manzanita bush, which is a plant that has chemicals with some medicinal uses, among other things. And Donald describes the creatures as being, quote, intensely curious about their surroundings. It basically sounds like they were taking time to look around and collect samples of things in the environment. It's often described that they were looking for something, but he didn't know what.
Okay.
So apparently at this point, Donald was officially assuming that this was an extraterrestrial UFO, and he was now encountering alien visitors. Like, the way this is written, Donald is fully invested in the UFO stuff at this point. He wasn't, like, I think I mentioned, but it's like, it's not clear when he hypothesizes aliens, but the book makes it sound like it was, like, pretty much right at this point, he's assuming it's aliens.
It was part of it basically from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. He wasn't sure what they were doing, but the book describes how he was now in survival mode, presumably afraid of the stories he'd heard of alien abductions. Now, very interesting to me, the book's foreword is written by Donald's wife, Judy, and there she mentions that before Donald's experience, the way this is worded, it sounds like this is before Donald has this encounter. They had heard of the 1961 abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, and they had also heard of the 1957 abduction of the Brazilian farmer Antonio Villas Boas.
Both things we've covered on this show.
Both things we covered on this show, and I think it's worth thinking of Boas as we continue with this encounter because it's similar in a lot of ways. Boas is another one who, well, so, like, obviously Boas would be, like, have this weird fucking dreamy moment where he has sex with an alien woman, but in the lead up to that, he's, like, approached by a silent UFO that seems to be manned by hazmat suit wearing humanoids, right?
Yeah, and didn't we come back around to V.S. Boas about how that was maybe a CIA thing?
It's you cannot guarantee that. But
I know. I'm not saying we know it for certain. We don't know any of this shit.
It is theorized by some people who have investigated the case. I'd have to go look at the book that I have, but some people do believe that maybe this was a related to MK Ultra shit, which we're never going to escape now that it's been a thing on this show. But there is a conspiracy theory about that abduction, that it was maybe CIA like drugging operation on this poor farmer in Brazil. It's a whole thing. So yeah. And so I want you to think about that, because, like, I think they also gas Villas Boas or something like that. They spray something on his face or something. Keep all that in mind, okay? Donald watches these two humanoids do their thing and figured that he could just stay up in the tree dressed in full camo. He thinks maybe he's out of sight and he can just watch them and see what happens. So he claims that he had no plans to do anything about the strange visitors, but he'll also say how he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to survive the encounter. So he's presumably afraid that these are aliens who want to abduct him, but also he's like, well, maybe they'll leave me alone. I don't know. Suddenly, however, one of the humanoids walks over to the tree that Donald's in and just simply stands underneath it, staring up at him. funny and terrifying, honestly.
Yeah, it's one of those things that when you think about it from an outsider's perspective, it's funny, but then you think about it in real life, and even if it's just a dude in a hazmat suit that just
still
came out of a weird
fucking
thing,
scary.
Yeah, I would still probably be pissing on him from the tree because I'm scared.
We mentioned, this is a shit your pants and die moment. So the second humanoid creature follows suit, and it's here that Donald was instilled with a lifelong fear of those eyes. He would later remark about having nightmares where he'd wake up freaking out about the eyes of these things. He describes them as, quote, real large eyes as big as silver dollars. And then, of course, remember, these eyes were closer to welder's goggles than really anything biological. So he multiple times comments how he's not sure if they are biological creatures or mechanical, if they're robots, which we'll get to that in a moment. But he says, quote, all I could see was a black, flat-looking face with big, dark eyes. I couldn't tell the color. They seemed extra large. And their face was just kind of black-looking. I couldn't see if they had a helmet on or not. All I could see was a black patch of face and the eyes. I couldn't make out any features of the face. So later when he was speaking with investigators, Donald would recall that the creature had a very flat nose that was, quote, awful low on their face, end quote. Much lower on the face than a nose would be on a human. Again, just feels very gas masky to me. As the creatures stood under the tree, Donald would periodically hear a weird cooing or hooting sound, which seemed to emanate from the humanoids, or at least that's what he assumed. Whenever this sound occurred, the creatures would look up into the sky as if looking to the mothership.
So some sort of communication?
Yeah, so Donald would describe this as what he thought was a, quote, signal setup between the aliens and the massive ship hovering nearby. And he noticed, or he assumed over the course of the night, throughout this entire encounter, that whenever the sound would pop up and the humanoids would like look up to the sky, they would start up a new task. And he felt it was as if the mothership was like beaming instructions to them.
It's like they're getting, it's like you just loaded into the tutorial of a new game and you're getting the little like easy tasks that you're committing just to like check the camera and everything. So it's going, bing,
yeah, press A to frighten civilian. Press A to shake tree to get civilian down to abduct. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Once they get through the tutorial, that the noises will be a lot less frequent because they're going to have to actually work on the tasks.
Exactly. So, what I think is interesting here is Donald does say that it's possible that the sound was, quote, some owls someplace, but he nonetheless connects it with the ship and the humanoids and their actions. So, like, it's very weird because, like, on the one hand, if you were to like take the sort of tinfoil hat version here, it's like, oh, well, this is like something to do with their like communications between the black helicopter they rode in on and these people in hazmat suits. But then it's also, he's also saying like, I also might have just been hearing owls and thinking that they had something to do with these things. Honestly, something I'd really like to do in the future is explore the owl connection to UFO cases. Especially during this time period, because I think it's worthwhile. But yeah, he thinks that like maybe it was owls, but nonetheless, it seemed to him to have something to do with the ship and their actions. So, over the course of the night, 3 or 4 other humanoids in similar get-ups would come to the area, but it was only the initial 2 who approached Donald in the tree. And Donald says he didn't get a good idea of exactly how many there were, as the others that showed up came and went, seeming to be preoccupied with like taking various samples in the bush. And he would later explain that these humanoids all seemed to be scouting or looking for something, but he didn't know what that was. Because they were all dressed the same, he couldn't be sure if humanoids coming in and out of the area were ones that he'd already seen or not, which is why he was sort of confused about the numbers. But on his guess, it may have been up to 6 humanoids that approached the area that night. Now, it wasn't...
Like, I mean, that's the point of a uniform, is to depersonalize you.
True.
So, like, it's...
You don't know.
The aliens did their job. Everyone is just a part of the cogs of the system.
Yeah, exactly. So, It was not very long after the arrival of the first two humanoids that Donald would notice the arrival of a new creature. This creature was something with, quote, big eyes, just like two flashlights hooked together. And he would refer to this new creature as a robot. The eyes not only looked like these two flashlights hooked together, like he said, but upon their approach, he said that they were reddish orange, the color of fire. Whatever this creature was, it was either dressed in a metallic suit that made it look like a robot, or it was just straight up a robot. He's not sure. It's this whole bit with the robot's so fucking weird because he says it had a hinged robotic jaw, so think like Iron Giant.
Right.
It had no nose, and it had hands like a human's clad in metallic gloves, which he likens to like gauntlets for a suit of armor, so like they're hinged at the finger joints.
Okay, yeah. Instead of like we're going away from hazmat suit into armor here. Gotcha.
But in form, the creature was humanoid. It had this weird robot head and this metallic stuff on, but it looked like a humanoid again. And it was also, according to Donald, short and stocky with the goggle-like eyes that were emanating a different color from them. So.
This might be weird, but hopefully this makes sense. You know what this sounds like to me?
What?
This new guy is like the actual like put time in on their cosplay version, and all these other fucks are like bought
lazy,
their like cloth costume from Target,
showing up to the Halloween party with something that they threw together that morning. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like everyone's in these fucking cheapo hazmat suits, and one guy like really fucking went all off on his costume.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. Like it's such a weird. Because it only comes after he's already encountered these other humanoid things. So maybe they're just like talking into their communication devices saying like, all right, deploy the freaky alien robot monster. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a very weird
or it
thing.
Works like a Star Wars Battlefront where you have to complete enough things to then spawn one of the super characters, you know?
Yeah. Nile, are you antsy to maybe play some video games tonight? Is that what I'm getting out of you?
Not really, no. I just, for some reason, that's the poll that I continuously am on right now. For some reason, that's just where my brain's at today.
Well, it's like they say, life imitates art, and video games are art. And so life is a lot like video games if you think about it. So,
you're right. Yeah.
So the silver-suited humanoids moved much more human-like than the robot, which was stiffer when it moved, almost like it had a mechanical jilt, or perhaps it was wearing a metal suit of some kind.
Yeah.
And Donald noted that the robot seemed to have taken a slightly different route to the spot than the other humanoids did and appeared a bit later. And he theorizes that it was trying to avoid the thick brush. Again, just a detail that I find very strange. It's like these guys come from like the Northwest. This one was like more easterly. So it's like it went around to come to the area where Donald was. So like the first two humanoids, the robot approaches Donald's tree and they like just stand nearby it. And this robot comes up to where he had lit the signal fires, and it reaches down to these like signal fires that are now just like basically faded embers, and it swipes away what remains of the embers and fire. It like destroys it, and it scatters ashes around. And
interesting. Okay.
Donald's thinking here that perhaps these alien creatures were either afraid of the fire or they were just like unsure and uneasy about it. So he notes that due to the light from its eyes and the contrasting darkness, he couldn't actually make out a ton of detail below the torso of the robot, which for me makes me wonder how good he was at assessing how tall these things are. He's talking about how short they are, right? Like, but 5 feet is like kind of relatively normal. Like, and it just makes me wonder if his height is like causing him to think these people are shorter than they actually are, maybe. But also he's assuming they're aliens, right? Like,
yeah, he could be seeing it from kind of a weird vantage point, and like we've gone into this before about how people are really bad at gauging height and distance
size
in any sort of duress. Like you're not good without a lot of this is why, like, this guy didn't have the fucking convenience store strip of measuring stick on the side of the door, you know?
Right.
That's why that exists, is because we suck at this. So anytime someone tries to be like, yeah, this is how big they were, I'm always like, plus or minus like 50%.
Like, I don't mean it to discount him, but it's like, you know, I'm coming from an angle of like, this sounds like some fucking feds were up to some shit to me.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of very weird details. So like, I'm trying to like, the whole time I'm reading this story, I'm like, what happened here if this was not aliens, you know?
Yeah.
And I kind of have to assume that they're not all just like short kings, just like a squad of, we sent out the CIA shorty squad to take
the CIA
this guy
5 foot squad. Yeah.
But maybe who knows, honestly. Pretty interesting story nonetheless. So, at first, the humanoids and the robot didn't seem to care too much about Donald's presence. And then, after what Donald interpreted to be another signal from the mothership, the robot walks up to stand about 7 feet away from the tree that he's camped out in. And I'll let Donald describe what happens next. Quote, "It put one hand up to its mouth, and some kind of white vapor came out. He was upwind from me, so it just came up through the tree and acted like nitrogen would, just like gas. I never did smell anything. There was no smell of any kind, but I just kind of gasped for breath, and then I blacked out and fell across my bow."
Okay, so we've got the vapor coming in here. We've got he's not saying he's getting sprayed with something, but
No.
it has a similar effect of knocking him out.
No.
Okay.
In the book, it's theorized that the gas was an asphyxiant, possibly nitrogen, argon, or helium. But whatever the gas was, it was believed that perhaps it was like displacing oxygen levels. It was somehow inducing hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Like that's what they believe happened here. And that would cause Donald to pass out briefly. But whatever the gas was, or the intentions were of the robot and the humanoids, they didn't seem like it can, I think, be assumed that they weren't trying to like harm or kill him necessarily. They just wanted to prevent there's a couple points where like various investigators are theorizing what happened with the gas, like why this happened. And so it's like, were they trying to stop him from struggling against an abduction? Were they trying to stop him from watching them? Were they just trying to disorient him so that he didn't really have a good idea of his surroundings and what was going on? They just don't know. But it wasn't going to kill him. And if it had been some sort of like harmful, toxic thing, there would have been something that there's a little bit of sickness that he deals with after the whole event. But they don't ever say that they think it's necessarily the gas, for sure. And
because I mean, getting a little sick after a UFO encounter is like pretty common.
It's normal.
Is it?
And their fears are that he was exposed to radiation, which, like, again, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but they do determine that that was probably not the case, because if it had been radiation sickness of like any meaningful amount, he would have like lost his hair. He would have gone through all kinds of horrible shit, which never happened. But whatever this gas is, it would hit him, knock him out for like at least a few moments, and at worst like a couple minutes, because he would come back to consciousness in the tree, and he would like dry heave and then just be back in conscious.
Okay.
So he had been, kind of chill about these things, as chill as you could be. Like, he's kind of freaking out, but like they're not messing with him. And then they gas him, and now it's personal. So after getting knocked out with the gas, it's like fight or flight kicks in. According to Donald himself, he believed that the directive of the creatures had shifted. So he's like, oh, they were under orders to passively observe me by this like mothership or whatever. And then something changed. And then that directive shifted into an active attempt at abduction. And he believed that they wanted to take him as a specimen. So he starts to struggle past this like fear and shock of getting gassed and all that. And he grabs his bow and arrow and he begins firing arrows at the robot.
Hell yeah. Does he hit him?
Yes. So
Fantastic.
He manages to hit the robot in the chest. When the first arrow hit its mark, Donald describes seeing a bright flash of light erupting from it, quote, like a big arc flash. This impact and following flash knocked the robot back by about 2 feet. And after being hit, the creature backed away about 10 to 20 feet, according to Donald, and 2 of the other humanoids ran away, possibly frightened by the bow and arrow attack. So he scares them doing this. He manages to fire a few more arrows at the robot until he finally runs out of arrows.
Mm-hmm.
And he realizes that this bow and arrow assault didn't really damage the creature made of metal that he's firing at. The first arrow we would find like it would get bent by him hitting it. So he starts to improvise. Now, like I said, Donald always carries matchbooks with him. And he remembers seeing that these aliens or whatever they are afraid of fire is what he thinks. So he lights one of the matchbooks that he has on hand, the entire thing, and just tosses it at the humanoids and the robot. And amazingly, the humanoids and the robot all just start to back the fuck away. So he begins to be like, oh shit, they are afraid of fire. And I'm reading that and I'm like, whatever fucking chemical these guys have just sprayed, they don't know if it's going to fucking explode. Yeah. Is what I'm thinking reading this, right?
Sure, yeah.
So Donald begins a fire assault on these guys. He lights up his hat and he remarks how he must have had a good amount of like hair oil going on because the thing like stays pretty properly lit for a while. He throws it at them and they fucking back off like maybe 50 feet away.
Damn, okay.
So they get the hell away from him and they seem to not like the fire. But as the hat fire would die down, the creatures would then start approaching him again. So he just starts lighting all of the shit that he had on himself on fire and throwing it at them.
So he's in like a siege where he's just trying to keep as much stuff lit as possible.
This is where I was like, this is my favorite story. One of my favorites. It's so fucking sick. So he starts just lighting all this shit on fire. That includes his hunting license, every single dollar bill that he had on hand, and his camo gear, which he's like tearing pieces off, lighting it on fire and tossing it at them.
Wow. Okay.
So he's doing that and it keeps them at bay. And he did this until he used up every single thing that he had except for his shirt, belt, pants, and shoes.
So did he not so he wasn't like running away while doing this? He just was like standing his ground and keeping them away?
Yeah, he's just trying to keep them away from him. I think the idea here is like, I think for one, just with the way this area kind of looks, he's kind of like by a canyon. He doesn't have a lot of exits.
Okay.
Is the way it kind of looked to me. And he's sort of like got all these weirdo fucking alien things around him. So I think he just was like, I'm going to see if I can just survive up in this tree because I don't want to come down and fuck with these things.
Fair.
So yeah, he does that until he's just out of stuff. And once all the fires dissipate, the robot and the humanoids would approach him again. And once again, the robot would release vapor standing underneath the tree, which would cause Donald to pass out. And when he would come to moments later, he saw 2 of the humanoid creatures were trying to boost one another up the tree trunk where he was still perched. So...
Okay. All right. They got to start stacking.
Yeah, they're fucking Counter-Strike boosting each other up the tree. So presumably
It's better than someone trying to rocket jump.
that's probably true. Can you imagine he wakes up and one of these fucking hazmat suit freaks is firing a rocket at its own feet?
Yeah.
He's, I think, freaking out at this point, and Donald would just throw shit at them. Like, whatever he had left, he's throwing it at them. He's breaking tree limbs off and tossing it. He would even... My favorite little tactic that he uses is that he heard like a pack of coyotes nearby howling, and so he then imitates the howl. And in his mind, his logic is that the creatures would hear him do this and hear the pack of coyotes nearby, and they would assume that a pack of Donalds was coming to help him.
Oh my God. Okay. I thought it was like he's trying to draw the coyotes to run these things away, but no, he thinks that they're going to think that the more of him are okay. That's that is not the logic that I would have used to get to that conclusion, but I'm with it.
But these things pay no mind. They just kind of like back off whenever he lights things on fire, and kind of like are not. They just are kind of there. They don't go away. One of the really weird notes too here is that Donald at one point throws coins that he has at the creatures. For some reason, according to Donald, whenever he tosses the coins, the creatures would actually stop and pick them up. They pretty much ignored everything else that he tossed at them, but they would like take the time to stoop and pick up coins.
So he didn't think to like take a handful of coins and throw them way off in one direction.
I don't know. He just is throwing. He's like desperate at this point and throwing stuff at them to keep them away, because they keep trying to climb up the tree.
I'm trying to strategize here, and I'm not really under the pressure of seeing possible aliens
You're not
trying to kill me. So
I would also like to point out that like throughout this entire encounter, he is like periodically getting gassed and passing out, waking up, dry heaving, and fighting again. That's what he's doing.
This is actually kind of horrific.
It really is. It really, really is.
It's both very entertaining, but also when you really think about it, it sucks so bad.
It really does. Him. I mean, you'd have to be so disoriented, right? So
yeah,
the book, what I find is funny is like the book it's one of those things where they're kind of, because like it's written by some MUFON people, so it kind of just naturally assumes the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So these are aliens, and it speculates that the reason they're stopping to pick up the coins is that the alien creatures are studying us, and coins could be useful data points from an archaeological perspective. And like we have like intricate, detailed, like etched coins and stuff with like famous figures from human society. They could learn so much by picking up the coins, whereas they can't do anything with the other stuff he's throwing, I guess.
I
guess
that seems like a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Like I almost feel like the rationale should be that they knew the coins were made of a metal that was scarce on their planet.
Sure.
So like that makes more like, I get, sure, they're taking samples, they're doing scientific research, yada, 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 yada. But I don't think a bunch of loose change from this guy's pocket that's like has a series of coins from, plus or minus 5 years of the date of this thing is going to be great for like archaeological purposes for aliens. I'm not sure it's really going to be that helpful.
I don't know. And here's a weird question. So like, I know you can like trace dollar bills, right?
Yeah.
Can you do the same thing with coins? Would that be traceable in any way?
They have to have like,
I have no idea.
I know that they have marks for where they were minted, but I don't know if individual coins have like, I don't think coins have serial numbers or anything in them.
Yeah.
So maybe not.
I really don't know. The reason I'm even putting it out there is because I'm like, again, trying to think about this story about like, if it's not aliens, right? Like if it's people, the first thought I had was the stupid one, which is like, well, maybe if they're like, we have to disappear this guy, we need to collect anything that could be traced back to him. But then, like, I also thought about it, and I was like, well, what if, like, the coins have some sort of, like, reaction to the gas they're using? I don't really know. The coin thing is a bizarre detail that I don't understand.
Yeah.
I can only speculate, and neither of the things that I'm like throwing out there sound good to me. So like, I don't know.
Hey, maybe the galactic exchange rate's really good, and they're
that's
strapped
true.
for cash.
The American silver dollar is strong for them in 1964. I don't know. It's who knows. So yeah, this would play out all night. He would get gassed, he would pass out, wake up, dry heave, make another panic play. Not clear how long this all went down, but it seemed to last all night. He says, quote, I'd be shaking the tree, and then this gas would get me, and I'd black out, and then as soon as I'd wake up, they'd be just starting to get up the tree again. So while this was all happening, most of the humanoids would still, like the ones that weren't directly under the tree, would still be like nearby, combing through the nearby brush, looking for something, possibly taking samples, maybe both. And another really weird detail, at one point, Donald threw his empty canteen at them, and this caused one of the humanoids to kind of come over, pick it up, look at it for a moment, and then toss it away as if it suddenly realized it didn't want or need it. So, again, very strange detail. At some point, a second robot shows up nearby, and the book makes this really dark mention here that Donald at one point considered throwing himself from the tree and into the nearby canyon to kill himself, to end it. But thoughts of his wife and daughter convinced him to press on in his fight against the mysterious entities. And then, as the first hints of daylight began to twinkle on the horizon, the two robots came to stand right in front of one another, directly under Donald's tree. Flashes of light would then emanate from the robots, back and forth, and the light would sort of burst out, sort of like an arc flashlight, like he describes before. It would burst out from one robot and then be absorbed by the other, and it would go back and forth. And it would light up the entire area. And the whole thing is described by the book as a, quote, dialogue of light. And as this happened, more vapor began to pour from both of the robots until Donald felt himself completely overwhelmed by the gas. And he suddenly felt an intense cold and passed out for a while. And when he wakes up, it was properly morning. It's freezing September cold. And he had strapped himself to the tree using his belt to prevent himself from falling when he was passing out over and over again from the gas. So when he wakes up the next day, he's like dangling attached to the tree by his belt. All the creatures from the previous night were gone, but all of his stuff was still strewn about, and he made a note that he also saw small footprints he would describe as being childlike and with this sort of like moccasin pattern.
Okay.
And yeah, everything was there except for the coins, which had been taken. And that morning, Donald was able to find his way back to the camp where his buddies helped him get settled, and he has a nice 6-hour nap. And they didn't know what happened to him, but from his confusion and mumbling and just generally how he was acting, they knew something weird had happened. According to Donald, when he finally woke up, he had Alvarez turn on the radio to hear a news report that was reporting on strange lights seen out by Reno. And Alvarez would also back up Donald's story because he claims that he had seen some strange lights the night before in the direction of the UFO, but he had initially assumed them to be a meteor in the sky.
Okay. So they had a second robot thing.
Yeah, it comes over and talks in light and then gasses him until he passes out.
But when they gassed him that time, they just stopped. Like it. This has kind of a weird ending.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like they just kind of, for whatever reason, stop trying to get to him, leave him in the tree, and disappear. and then he just gassed through till the morning.
Yeah.
Which, like, I guess if you're just trying to, it doesn't seem like it's well damage controlled,
Yeah. And I mean, I just, as the encounter goes on, the weirder the details kind of get.
Yeah.
To the point where I'm just like, I have no idea what happened here.
Yeah.
So Donald would make it home safe, but he would freak out his wife by just his demeanor. He would recount the sort of harrowing night he had. He kind of is like, look, I was besieged by aliens and I saw a UFO. And he tells her everything that happened. So she, by her account, knows something is wrong. Something happened. Donald would end up seeing a doctor. Like I said, they were fearing that he had been exposed to radiation. He would have a nonstop runny nose and chest pains in the couple weeks following. And the doctor's like, look, there's nothing you can do if it is radiation sickness. So, like, just see what happens in the next couple weeks. He never develops the symptoms of radiation sickness, so they get past that. But the Shrum family still didn't know what the fuck had happened to Donald. So Donald's wife, Judy, describes how this experience would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would wake in terror, crying about the terrible eyes of the creatures. He was now afraid of owls hooting, so if he encountered that, it would freak him out. And he had trouble staying outside at night on camping trips. Judy even claims that occasionally Donald would get this buzzing in his ears when he was out in the woods, and that buzzing would bring back the memories and fear from that night. So, in the years following the encounter at Cisco Grove, the Shrum family would work with a couple different investigators in an attempt to get to the bottom of things. Notably, they would make sure, this is one of the big things that gets brought up over and over again when you look up this case, and it's true, the Shrum family would remain anonymous on this story for decades. They would not reveal who they were.
Okay.
So I think it wasn't until like 2007 that Donald officially announced that it was his story.
Oh shit. Okay, so like legitimately
decades.
Like decades. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
The thing is, when I hear that and I hear about who's involved with the sort of dissemination of the story, it makes me wonder if that could have been maintained for real. But the point is that the Shrum family wanted to stay anonymous.
Right.
So they end up reaching out to this guy, Victor Killick, who is a man that was in charge of the Astronomical Observatory Center of Sacramento City College. And a family member had recommended Killick to them. So they're just thinking, weird UFO shit. Let's see if he has any idea. Let's talk to an expert. And after being shown maps of where the incident took place, Donald tells him the story. Killick then is like, maybe you should take this to the U.S. Air Force.
Okay.
And on behalf of the Shrum family, Killick pens a letter to the Air Force addressed to Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento County, so nearby. Oddly enough, when a response letter came, the address was from McClellan Air Force Base.
Hello.
McClellan, you may recognize because this base was a part of Air Force Logistics Command, and Air Force Logistics Command had its headquarters at Wright-Patterson Field in Ohio. And Wright-Patterson was, of course, where the infamous Project Blue Book operated from. So Killick arranged a meeting between the Shrums and U.S. Air Force. By the way, apparently there's a Project Blue Book file on this case.
Okay.
Supposedly, I believe Hynek himself investigated this one at one point, but I don't think anything really came of the Blue Book investigation, which, that's a pattern with Blue Book. But so 3 weeks, only 3 weeks after the incident, the Shrums get to meet with some U.S. Air Force people. According to the book in Judy's account, the meeting was held in a private residence that they were taken to just outside of the AFB's property. This part is the one that weirds me out more than anything else. They're taken to a private residence that seems to be just outside of the Air Force base's property. Judy describes the house as being off-putting and bare bones, like the place had never actually been lived in by anybody, and she even goes so far as to say that it felt like they were on a Hollywood set. And
Interesting.
there they have a meeting with a Captain McLeod and a Sergeant Major Barnes. And Barnes is the one who basically questions them the whole time, sitting at the table with them. And then McLeod, it's very tropey. McLeod's like standing behind Barnes with his arms folded, mostly listening to the conversation, every once in a while interjecting with his own questions. But it was pretty much handled by Barnes. And the entire meeting, I guess, was recorded on tape, although we don't have that.
Okay.
Judy claims that their line of questioning felt very disbelieving, almost as if they were trying to impress upon the Shrums just total disillusionment about what happened. Donald, for his part, was very cooperative. He gave them everything that he knew. He handed them some evidence, and he even handed them the arrow that he managed to bend when he shot the robot creature.
Okay.
So the idea here was that there could be like scrapings, filaments that came from the robot in the arrow, and that they wanted to get it analyzed to figure out what it was. That was the idea, at least. Now, here's the thing. In the weeks that followed, the Shrums would have correspondence with the Air Force. And like I said, Judy's whole thing is like they're very dismissive. They don't believe, and they seem to not want us to believe. And they would end up, I guess, quote unquote, losing the arrow. They would basically come back and say like, hey, you know, we didn't actually conduct an analysis, and also we don't know where it is. And then when Donald would go out with his brother to investigate the original site of the incident, he claims that they would find that everything that had been left behind was gone, save for a few arrows in a bush. So when they talk to the Air Force about this, because like Donald's like he has a whole thing where he's like, I think they flew somebody out in a helicopter and just gathered everything up and disappeared it.
Okay.
Kind of hard to say if that's true. I mean, this is like, what, 3 weeks plus after the initial incident? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? It's not, you can't prove that.
But what was definitely weird was when the Air Force, and you can find that they have like photocopies of Air Force correspondence to them in the book. They first get told, like, the person that's talking to them from the Air Force is like, well, you may have encountered Japanese people because since World War II, we'd had, quote, had trouble with Japanese people. And that's their first thing that they say to them. And then they come back and they say, well, actually, maybe it was a prank by locals. And then finally, they like kind of lightly make the implicit suggestion that Don and his buddies had been drinking that night.
Of course, yeah.
Which,
I mean, that has to happen.
According to Donald and Judy, he does not drink. That's what they say. There's nothing in the story about them drinking. Donald insists his friends didn't drink that night either. So, and I mean, why would you get drunk on a hunting trip? I guess I asked that question and realized there's a lot of reasons why you would. But
yeah,
I'm not a hunter. I don't know. But they're insisting that was just not at all close to reality. So they told the Shrums, like I said, they never managed to get an analysis of the arrow. They lose it, and then they're like, oh, actually, we loaned it to a University of Colorado UFO study group. That study group was a group known as the Scientific Investigation of Unidentified Flying Objects, which was led by Edward Condon.
That name sounds familiar.
That is the guy behind the Condon Committee and the Condon Report, which basically dismisses UFOs and their research, the researching of it. Okay. So there's like, it mentions in the book how like the more conspiracy-minded UFO people are like, well, the Condon Report and like the other things that happen in that sort of era of ufology were ways to sort of like control the narrative of UFOs, which was now getting out of control because people were kind of freaked out about it. That's just a part of that. So also, just a side note, this is a rumor. No way to know if this is true, but it's rumored that the arrow evidence that was sent by Donald would actually eventually just land in the hands of UFO icon Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So he may have had it at some point. So the snubbing of by the Air Force would lead the Shrums into the loving arms of NICAP. And Donald would provide the investigator Paul Cerny with what evidence he had. To keep a long story short, Cerny seemed to try to do a good analysis of the things that he was given. Ultimately, they kind of come up empty-handed. Judy Shrum would also wind up reading Donald Kehoe's explosive story on UFO cover-ups in True magazine in 1965, only 4 months after his encounter at Cisco Grove. And so after Donald's encounter, she would end up writing him a letter explaining her husband's experience while signing it anonymously. We read that letter in my Donald Kehoe episodes, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
So she's anonymous, but she's writing to Donald Kehoe. They're like super into his work. And from here, the story would spread to a number of other UFO magazines and interest groups, like all over the place. The details would get fudged as the story passed around. But the dissemination of the story prompted further investigation from NICAP, with Cerny basically heading the thing. I didn't get the impression that they learned much, but apparently Cerny would become friends with Donald Shrum. But there was never really any closure on this story. The Air Force kind of, according to the Shrums, covered the shit up, and then Cerny doesn't like NICAP doesn't uncover any amazing evidence. The NICAP investigation would lead to a somewhat unique hypnotic regression session because Donald was awake for basically the entire encounter, not counting the gassings. So
right,
there's really only certain small moments where he's like out of it. But this hypnosis, at least for Donald, confirmed something that he had been concerned about for a long time. It confirmed that he was worried for years that he had actually been abducted. When he finally passed out, he was taken aboard an alien ship and tested on or whatever. Apparently, the hypnotic regression session would basically prove to him that he was not abducted. They never made it.
The only hypnotic regression session to ever say you weren't abducted?
I guess
probably?
so. And it's like an unnamed hypnotherapist. I don't know who conducted this. So he had not been taken aboard the craft. And this hypnosis is also where he gets the whole 150 feet long thing.
Right. Okay.
So last weird part of the story to close it out. Very strange. Donald Shrum and both of his buddies who he had been on the camping trip, all three of them worked at a company called Aerojet. This was a rocket and missile propulsion manufacturer. So they were heavily involved with rockets. They would paint them, I believe, was one of their main jobs. This company supplied both rocket engines for use in the early space program, but also missiles for the U.S. Air Force during the Cold War. Furthermore, Donald and his hunting pals would get let go from Aerojet just 2 years after this incident. Years later, in the 70s, it would come out the company would undergo a scandal and an investigation by the EPA for their use of trichloroethylene, or TCE, which was discovered to be a carcinogen. Horrifyingly, Judy Shrum and Donald's son Dan would recount how Donald would come home with his clothes soaked in the fucking stuff. The chemical would even ooze out of his sweat, leaving the bed sheets stained yellow. And the Shrum family believes that TCE was likely the culprit that led to Donald having a number of health problems later on in his life.
God damn.
So the book tries to do the thing of like, well, the aliens are here because they're concerned about humanity's self-destruction. And if that's the case, then Sacramento, where this company's dumping toxic chemicals into its own land and it's abusing these things, they're here to save us from that.
Yeah, okay. Doubt it.
But Donald's like, his reason for going anonymous this entire time is like, I am afraid I will get let go from my job, which he was. Not due to the UFO thing, but like later on he would be. He was afraid that he would just get labeled a kook. It would bring shame to him and his family, and he would be ridiculed and let out of the job. Now, I can't help but hear this and think about how one of the sort of black helicopter cattle mutilations thing is like them going in the 70s, the conspiracy theory at least, and like abducting these cows to conduct tests on things that they believe may have been, irradiated by missile testing.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of extrapolating from that the same idea of like, here's a guy who is exposed to this chemical by a manufacturer of missiles to the Air Force. And they're like, the whole like going in and like they're taking samples of plants and stuff. It's so weird. I can't say any conclusive, but like the tinfoil hat.
Yeah, you start to unravel the whole thing, and it's like, were they seeing the effect of this chemical on these guys that were like, doused in it all the time?
Yeah. Incredibly strange. And fascinating.
Yeah.
And that is the story of Donald Shrum.
We've got some short king humanoids. We got some fucking giant robots. We got a guy in a tree. We got some fucking spook shit. It's got everything.
It's super weird. It's super duper weird. And I just love any story where somebody winds up just trying to fight off aliens.
Yeah, the standoff.
Thinking about the guy with the katana.
Yeah,
from many years ago, on what was it, Stardust Ranch, who fucking claims he fought Greys with a katana. I love that shit. Mm-hmm. But that is the story of Donald Shrum. It's a fucking weird one. Who knows what happened here and what's true and what isn't. But I love the story.
Yeah, I do too.
So, all that being said, Nile, are you ready for a big question?
I am.
All right. What's in your alien survivalist kit? If you have to be out in nature and you encounter aliens, what's in your survival kit to prevent yourself from being abducted?
I do think some stuff to make fire is in there, because I think fire is like a common enough weak point for like it. Okay, so I don't know what these things are, but fire seems to do a lot of damage to enough things that it's like, by odds, just by playing the odds, it would be a good way to start against. Like I was thinking earlier about like, what element would I want to use to try to like take on aliens?
What elemental weakness are they weak to?
And I think fire makes a decent amount of sense. So I think I would go with that. I don't trust myself with like a gun or anything, so I don't think I would want anything like that. But like, I would take like a taser,
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea. So like you have, so fire elemental damage in case there's sort of like a grass type.
Yeah.
But then you have electric type damage with the taser in case they're a water type.
Yeah,
and so you cover.
I do think I would just keep some like knives or something. Like I think that would be part of it. I'm doing all like offensive weapons here. I'm sure like maybe some stuff to hide, like a camo tarp or something.
Sure, yeah. I was thinking the same thing with a tarp. I would also probably take knives, but that would mostly be in the very slight edge case that I accidentally kill one of the aliens, and I'm cutting that thing up and grilling it to find out. You
have to at least check it out and see what it tastes like. So like you're not going to get that opportunity again.
Exactly. Now, I would like to throw a couple ideas at you.
Okay.
Because I actually really like where your head's at with these ideas. One, I think you should have a hazmat suit, because then you can like mimic them, right?
Yeah.
These things always look like they're in fucking hazmat suits because. So I think getting something like, you see aliens on the horizon, you're like, oh fuck, put a hazmat suit on. Then you just look like one of them. You pick up their pattern of like looking at the mothership, aliens hooting, or owls. I guess they're aliens hooting. Yeah. You look up, you mimic them. So I think one, that would kind of get you to blend in.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Some other stuff that you could do. Just have like a big container, like a jug of colloidal silver. I've heard that stuff's good for whatever reason. Conspiracy theorists like to shill that stuff. So I'm assuming it will help you in an alien abduction.
It's
scenario.
like holy water for aliens, right? Like if you get
something
with
like
it burns. I'm sure that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's at least as close as anything anyone else says about fucking colloidal silver.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to assume that colloidal silver is like a dark type damage, maybe.
Yeah.
So if they're
if they're Arctic beings of light, not Arctic, if they're galactic
Arcturian
beings of Arcturian beings of light, then that will be good for that.
Exactly. So I think, but like then I would honestly like a gun.
Have you ever
take
fired a gun in real life?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, once.
I never have. So
I shot.
I shot a kid. What?
No,
Die Hard? Okay.
I shot. What are those called? Skeet.
Okay.
I shot that with my step grandfather one time, and it was kind of fun. My only real takeaway was just how much I ended up fucking up my shoulder doing it.
Yeah.
With the kickback, I don't know if it was my form or what, but yeah, that was painful, but kind of fun. So I'm assuming it would be, shooting aliens would be a very similar scenario. I only ended up hitting like 2 of the skeet discs, but a slow moving alien is going to be an easier target, and so I'm thinking I'm going to take like a Glock or like a P90 or whatever. Anyways, Nile, that's the story for this week. Fantastic. I love this story. I'm going to get back to CIA spooky shit soon too. I will forewarn everybody. And yeah, with that being said, would you like to take care of some business?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take care of that. So if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all of your favorite podcatchers. Wherever you go for podcasts, wherever you listen to them, look up It Gets Weird, and we're almost certainly there.
Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. That's right. Sometimes we stream video games. Lately, I've been playing Shadow of the Erdtree co-op with our good friend Colin, who you just heard on the show recently. So go ahead and give us a follow there. If you'd like to email us and maybe have your email read on the show, go ahead and email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know how to address you, and if your email is good, we'll read it on the show. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $1 tier, a $2 tier, and a $5 tier. At the $1 tier, you're just giving us a tip. You don't get anything. You're just saying, hey, love the show. Thanks for doing what you do. Here's $1. At the $2 tier, however, you get access to It Gets Weird TV, where right now Nile and I are finishing up the X-Files Season 2, and we are going to put up lore on there. So you get to vote as a donor to $2 tier and above on what we watch next for It Gets Weird TV. So check out the $2 tier. But even better than the $2 tier is the $5 tier, where you get access to a bunch of other bonus content, lots of different things, huge back catalog. Right now, Nile and I have been starting a new show where we're kind of just talking about things that don't make it out on the main show. A lot of it is kind of similar to the tangents we would have on a main episode, but for an entire hour plus. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and check that out. $5 tier. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday, and you get access to the Discord where we're hanging out. You can talk to us directly. We're talking Bigfoot. We're talking UFOs. We're talking conspiracies. We're talking ghosts and spirits. All kinds of shit with the fans, so go ahead and check it out. If you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird Podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continuing to support the show. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Nile.
And I'm Kyle, signing out.
Peace.